Okay, this is GamerBlave, and we're here with True Remembrance. And if you've been following along but missed the last video, then I strongly encourage you to check that one out, because the last one really changed things up dramatically. Really changed the tone of the whole novel. And I don't want to really dwell on it too long right here in my sentiments about it, because I really, as I tend to do, I go on ad nauseum at the end of the last one I did, for sure. So, but anyway, what really happened was Lips, who we have met now, came into it, and what we have is a situation where she was involved with the people who were doing the bomb threats and what have you. And anyway, now to make a long story short, those people have kidnapped Law. So Lips and Blackiris are going to be working together to attempt to get her back. And at this point, Blackiris has determined that there's no point in searching around blindly, and I would agree with that assessment. That would hurt more than it would help. So for now, we're going to have to wait. I knew that intellectually, but still emotionally, this was hard to take. Every moment we sat still was another moment that Law was in a hostile party's hands. My fears, however, were unfounded. Rook was waiting for us by the time we got to Aroma. There had already been contact. They want to bring the list to the old church on 5th in 1 hour sharp. Now, would you mind telling me what the hell is going on here? They want, I missed that there. That's kind of a crucial point there. And that's exactly what I did. Rook was more correct than he knew. This was hell, all right. I told him everything about the gun, the list, Law's kidnapping, and about how Lips was a member of the terrorist cell. Rook was completely blown away. You're really with them? No freaking kidding. No kidding? Although it seems that I've become a traitor. It was startling to watch the way that Rook was studying Lips now. He wasn't just starting at the way he usually ogled beautiful women. No, this was a hard, emotionless glare. He saved it for rivals and enemies like me, sometimes. But I had no time for any of this today. I left Aroma with Lips hot on my heels. Rook looked like he wanted to come with us, but eventually I had him stay put. Now, it was true that someone had to stay behind just in case there was any further contact, but still I knew that I was dealing him a harsh hand here. It had started snowing by the time we made it to the trolley station. Neither of us had an umbrella. Our heads were dusted with snow. We didn't care. Lips kept pace at my side. Her eyes were straight forward. Her entire body was quivering with tension, and yet she seemed far more at home within herself now than the first time I'd met her. Tell me, how come you're not asking me about the leader of the cell? Because I know who he is. I saw him myself. He's a high-ranking professor of mnemonicydology. That's a mouthful right there. Never had a class with him, though. Right. That's right. The man I saw coming out of the apartment on 5th Street. There was no mistaking him. Everyone in my class during my training days knew who he was. A figure like that would have access to every last operational file that HQ had to offer. No wonder nobody had been able to bring these traitors to justice. Or these terrorists to justice, excuse me. Don't you want to know what our goals are? Not at all. I told you before, you're free to do as you please in this town. But if you lay so much as a finger on my guest, and that's exactly what's happened, then there'll be hell to pay. Lips looked up at me in silence for a time. Then, finally, she spoke, in a voice as cold as steel. She's probably safe. He's not as horrible as you're making him out to be. Not horrible enough to hurt law, but just horrible enough to explode bombs on innocent people, eh? My, I was impressed by his compassion. Lips saw the look on my face and smiled painfully. Very well. I see there'll be no convincing you, so I'll just tell you, whether you believe me or not, that's up to you. She looked up at the snow-laden clouds, as if this were to be the last time her eyes would see them, and then she started to talk. Total emancipation. They want to break down the bureaucracy. It clearly doesn't work. Pneumonicide should serve anywhere and everywhere, not just in this isolated location. That's not doing us any favors at all. They constructed this town precisely because it was dangerous for pneumocides out in the real world. A pneumocide's powers and his control over them were incredibly unstable things, and on top of that, most people hadn't even heard of us. If people knew, then we were going to have a bloody uprising on our hands, nationwide. Perhaps, but according to him, he wants to make sure pneumocides have power, enough power to help the weak. The weak? How arrogant. I suppose his goal is to create a new trade network of pneumocides and to profit until he's filthy rich, I wonder. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps not. Okay, so that's something I didn't really realize, that people don't quite understand what pneumocides are and how they operate, or how they work. Of course, at this point, we don't quite, as the reader here / viewer, we don't really understand exactly how they work. We haven't really seen it in action. We just have bits and pieces and clues, so we don't really know. But that's interesting. It's almost like, I would say it's almost like the perhaps the world, the nation or the world at large sees this town almost like we do, and that it's a lot of it is still mysterious to us at this point, honestly. Lip shook her head then, in a futile attempt to shake off the demons in her heart. There was nothing but confusion and anger and loss in her eyes. I met him during one of our standardized patient encounters. I was just a student there, and he taught me so well. Speaking of which, how many years did you graduate in? 2. The Genius Accelerated course. Somehow I'm not surprised. But you'll excuse me if I'm just a little envious. It took me 7 years. In other words, I've been here for far longer than you have. Lips laughed, her voice filled with self-derision. Obviously, she knew this wasn't something you boasted about. I entered the academy when I was 12. 12. Can you imagine that? I didn't know anything about pneumonicide, the world, anything. And on top of that, I was a dunce. No one liked me, no one helped me along, I was lonely. But he was the one who came and held my hand. He was the one who told me that it was okay, that I'd turn out fine. You're in love with him. Yeah, or was. Right now I have no idea. I don't know if I really was in love with him, or if I was just lonely and willing to accept any companionship that came my way. She kept talking, as if by doing so she'd be able to extract the purest darkness of her heart from the very words that fell from her mouth. Who was she conversing with now? Who is she listening to? Certainly not me. These are all things I've really come to hate about myself, but I think I might be too late for me now. I think it might be too late for me now. Would someone like you have any idea how that feels? Probably not. No, I understand a little. Oh? Lips said with a surprise. Then she smiled. Oh, good heavens. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How come I can't be honest with myself in even one little thing? So that's why you left the list at Aroma. That was your attempt to try to stop the cell from doing anything more. Is that right? That's right. I didn't have the courage to send it to HQ, but I was hoping if I got to know the owner of Aroma and accidentally left the list lying around, he would pick it up and take the appropriate steps. And I was pleasantly surprised too. He's a really nice guy, and I've caused him so much trouble now too. Now I was glad Rook wasn't here. Had he heard any of this, I think he'd have spiraled into an uncontrollable depression. Or into an uncontrollable rage. Either way, something uncontrollable and bad. It would have been much better had she just been open and honest with us from the very beginning. And the final nail in the coffin is, my powers are dying. Back in the old day, I used to be able to pick up on people's thoughts a lot more easily, but nowadays, I can't even catch a glimpse. You get kicked out of town if you're not an Ammonicide anymore, right? That's why I wanted to put an end to this before I got deported. I see. I nodded. I had no idea whether it was a good idea to tell her what I was about to tell her, but she looked so sad and alone at that moment that I didn't really have a choice in the matter. An Ammonicide's powers will inevitably fade when he is filled to capacity. What? Or at least, that's what the textbooks say. Lips smiled ambiguously at this. Burnout. The signs were obvious. She was very close. If she remained alone in this state for much longer, she was in danger of losing her powers permanently. In some ways, this was the happiest thing that could happen to her, or any Ammonicide. Okay, so Ammonicides can lose their power. I'm going to write that down. Ammonicides can lose power. Inevitable. They were waiting for us at the old church on 5th, the professor and 2 others. Law was lying motionless on one of the church benches. Okay, so they found her. Law is back in action. No need to worry now, son. I've just drugged her, that's all. She hasn't been hurt. Unless she has a catastrophically bad reaction to these drugs, which is possible. I do not know her medical history. So, there is that outside possibility. But apart from that minuscule possibility, she's probably okay. The professor said with a smile as he ruffled Law's hair. Law shuddered a bit, and then was still again. Have you brought the list? I took the envelope out of my pocket. I opened it up and unfolded the piece of paper and showed it to him. Good. Now hand it over to Lips and send her over here. Lips jumped in surprise. She stared hard at the professor, and then she finally nodded. She'd decided at last. So she took the envelope and walked slowly to the professor's side. Her eyes, her face, her body. There was bitterness oozing out of every pore as she approached her lover. She handed the envelope over to him and rushed directly to Law's side. But the moment she knelt to examine Law, one of the men pulled out a gun and held it to her head. Lips felt the ring of cold steel and turned to the professor. Well, why would they pull out a gun at this point? It seems completely superfluous and unnecessary. Pardon for being redundant there, but gee whiz. You've got what you want at this point. My goodness. It's completely preposterous. What are you doing? That isn't something a traitor has the right to know, lass. He turned to me, bringing his arm up to aim a gun at me, but I was faster. Mine was already pointed at him. He stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Obviously, he hadn't expected this. And? Are you going to shoot? Are you going to try to kill me? That's my line. Thank you very much. This isn't your lucky day. All I want is for my guest to be safe, and you happen to be in the way. The professor's mouth fell open. He stared at me in total disbelief. He couldn't tear his eyes away, no matter how hard he tried. He started trembling. Cold sweat started running down his face. He grew paler and paler. He looked cold. I simply stared back at him with a look that froze him to the spot. Gee whiz. Blackiris is just dirty harrying this guy. When I was younger, I was considered a crack shot with these. If this were a gunfight, you'd have no chance. My index finger tightened on the trigger. The professor gulped loudly. His eyes rolled upward, and then all consciousness and light faded from him. Gee whiz. Now, here's my question. Is the professor just a total wuss, or is Blackiris actually employing some actual, psionic, suggestion? Is he actually using some mental powers to kind of heighten the intimidation? Or is he really that intimidating? The fact that there's another guy in there with a gun and he's outnumbered, or is he just legitimately so intimidating that this guy who is in charge of this terrorist organization is so intimidated by a dude with a gun that he's just going to pass out? Because I'm curious. I don't know. That's interesting. But you don't even deserve that. He crashed to the ground. I fired a shot into Lip's captor's legs without a moment's hesitation. Gee whiz. That's awesome. Oh man. The man doubled over. Lips sprung into action, jarring the man behind her off balance, stripping him of his gun and throwing him. Wow. Gee whiz, Lips came to play. I kind of figured Lips for a bumbling fool after a lot of the stuff that we've seen her do. She really has not really been particularly professional or seemingly adept at most of the things that she's attempted to do. But man, seems like she really pulled that one off pretty well there. And while he was still in the air, she brought up a knee in a blinding strike right to his chin. Good night. He wasn't going to be seeing anything for a very long time. Wow. Impressive, most impressive. So you can take care of yourself. This is nothing much, but that's not important right now. She pocketed the gun she'd taken from her assailant, gave him another kick for good measure as he flopped on the ground, and then turned to look down at the fallen professor. Just a short bolus of amnesia. He'll recover soon enough. Ah, so he did. Man, he just hammered him with a friggin' psionic attack. That's awesome. But presumably, you've got to assume that Blackiris has got to be extremely powerful, maybe even more powerful than they've been talking about, because if this guy was a professor at the training these mnemonocytes, then you would have to assume that he was incredibly powerful. I mean, I'm just guessing. So if Blackiris can just floor him with his powers like that, then wow, that's crazy. That is bonkers. You're a dangerous man, you know, and your powers are even more so. That's precisely why I remain here. She nodded, so she finally understood. Tears were streaming down her face. I didn't know if it was because she realized that she'd sold her lover out, or if it was because she felt some pity for him in his prostration. I didn't know, and I didn't care either. Because she stopped crying soon thereafter, and she never cried again. I mean, never cried about that particular issue? How would you know if she never cried again for the rest of ever? I have to assume that it was about that issue, that she got over it. That has to be what that expression means. I'm just going to move on and assume that that's what that means. Law woke up in due course, and then we started heading home. A cleanup team from HQ would be here soon enough. Rook had taken care of that, at least I presumed. Oh wow, how embarrassing. I didn't want to cry. Were you watching? Lip said as she rubbed her red-rimmed eyes. For once, Law was walking a little bit behind me. She probably didn't feel so well right now. No, I wasn't. Which means I was, of course. He actually said that. I kind of figured this should be no, I wasn't, and then put the quotation marks there, and then kind of parenthetically, which means I was, of course. But Blackiris, you're not supposed to say the which means I was, of course, to her. My goodness. Lips nodded a little crossly. A little while later, she nodded again, came close indeed, and kissed me on the cheek. I happened to be looking sidelong at Law at that moment, and I was amused to watch her eyes snap open, as big as saucers. Be a good boy, and forget for me, please. Aha! So this was why she called herself Lips. I nodded and smiled. Law took offense to this and went running past me as fast as her little feet could take her. Lips stuck her tongue out at me. Obviously, she was trying to taunt me. So I was in big trouble now, eh? I merely sighed and said to her, I'm sorry, but that doesn't work on me. Although I think it might be better if we both forgot this little experience. I agree. I saw the new light in her eyes. At last, she finally understood. It was okay for her to be free of that man's shadow. If you like, there's a much better man I know who'd love to meet you, although he's a pretty big rascal if you ask me. I'm looking forward to it. She smiled at me mysteriously and then looked up at the sky. The snow drifted down from the low-hanging clouds onto her hair and her cheeks and melted away. Law remained silent the entire time, even after we'd parted with Lips, and were well on our way home to 8th Street. I was getting a little concerned at this point, so I said to her, "Hey Law, are you mad?" Law stopped in her tracks. She turned to me, shook her head, and bit her lip. She was holding something in, but what that something was, I had no clue. "No, not mad at all. Not mad at all." Her voice grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Her eyes, too, looked lower and lower until they were busy studying her shoes. Snow covered her hair and her shoulders. It brushed past her pale cheeks. She looked cold and alone and lost. "Not mad at all, but don't know. Don't know what's what anymore." "Well, I mean, you're recovering from who knows what narcotic. I mean, she could just be spewing out nonsense, but who knows?" She put her hands on her heart, as if there was something massive and painful throbbing away inside her little chest. And then I remembered something I'd been wanting to say to her for a long time now. "Law, that was very dangerous what you did. You could have been injured or killed had things not gone your way." "I know, but still, I thought I could escape. Didn't expect them to drug me." "That's not what I'm talking about." As my voice echoed across the frozen wasteland of a street we called our neighborhood, I finally realized I was the one who was mad, not her. "I was so worried. I was so glad that you're all right. I really am." "I'm sorry, Blackiris. I'm so sorry." "Oh, don't cry now, okay? If they find out that I made my guest cry, I'm sure they're going to do something really bad to me." Law smiled then, and slowly began wiping the tears from her face. I let out a sigh of relief. "Let's go home and relax, okay? I'm totally exhausted. How about you?" "Me too. I'll cook up a nice dinner for you. You deserve it." "I'd love that. Wait a second. Right now our place looks like a bomb went off in it." "Oh, for crying out loud. I'd totally forgotten about that. It was going to take all night for us to clean up the mess." Yeah, that kind of sucks. After you deal with that metaphorical mess, you got to go home and deal with the literal mess. That kind of sucks. But that was okay. Law was going to be at my side. We'd get through it. Although I would have preferred to eat her undoubtedly delicious dinner and go to sleep forever. Well, to be continued. I reckon on that note, what we will do is continue this on a later date. The video is a little bit shorter than usual, but I think we should adhere to the pacing of the visual novel here. We wouldn't want to break that, would we? But that was an interesting little episode there. How that just kind of broke away from it. I'm assuming that was probably gonna be wrapped in a bow. I doubt that the professor's coming back, simply because that whole, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but just because that situation was so far outside of what had been going on, and once again, I talked about this, how I thought about this, or how I felt about this in the last video, so I'm not going to go on about that too much here. But since it was so far, or so different than everything else, I doubt that they're going to continue on that story. I think that was just kind of an episode to illustrate a couple of different things to deepen the relationship with Law. I think it was also, you see maybe a little bit of jealousy there at the end with Law. I don't know if that's what she was expressing or not. Maybe she was just confused about something else. But maybe she's having some romantic or some confused feelings for Blackiris. I'm not sure. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Law, romantic feelings? Question mark? I don't know. But who knows? But anyway, I'm kind of thinking that they wrap that up and that's done, especially because when they were walking away, they said Rook's gonna have the cleanup crew kind of come take care of that mess. I think that the terrorist situation is done for. So I think we're pretty good there. But anyway, yeah, that was kind of an interesting departure from the norm. From the day-to-day routine, so to speak, in the Mnemonicide town here. It certainly shook things up a little bit for Blackiris and Law there. But I guess we'll see how her treatment continues in the next episode. And that being said, if you like this one, then remember to hit that like button. And if you liked it a lot and you want to see the rest of this visual novel or anything else that I may be playing on this channel and you are not currently subscribed, then go ahead and subscribe as well if you are so inclined. But regardless, as always, thanks for watching, and we're going to be picking up right here next time.